Hello, everyone. I bet you thought you'd seen the last of me. It's been a few years. It's been maybe three years now, I think, since I made a video. Um, I'm back. Some time has passed. Let's talk about it. I've honestly been thinking about making this video for a few years now. Basically since a few months after I stopped making videos in the first place, and I just kept thinking, oh, I need to get to this certain point of knowing what's going on and stuff like that, and confidence in myself and in what I believed and all of that. And I just think that if I were to continue trying to be perfect about that, then I would be waiting forever. So I decided, like, let's just do it. It's time. I'm also extremely nervous and I feel like slightly like I'm going to throw up, but that's okay. We will persist anyway. So for anyone who did not see my previous videos or does not know who I am, hello, my name is Max. I am a 25-year-old trans man, and a few years ago, in January of 2020, I posted a video basically saying that I was detransitioning, that I basically thought that I wasn't trans, or more accurately, that I thought that I was trans, and then I thought that I was dysphoric because of some outside influence or something like that, basically. And that video ended up getting about 100,000 views, which was very unexpected for me. It was intended to be more of like a friends and family type of thing, and so that was a huge shock to me. And ultimately, I ended up going sort of down this rabbit hole of detransition content and ultimately anti-trans content. And today I want to talk about that and sort of what led me through that process, what my thoughts and feelings were like in that, and also just the effect that that's had on me. Because I honestly don't see people talking about this a whole lot. There's Kai Shivers, who I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. I'm so sorry. Is someone that I have seen who has had this similar experience of detransitioning and then coming back and then talking about it. But I, in general, don't see a whole lot of information about this. And I guess while maybe it is like more of a niche experience than some other experiences, I don't think that I don't think that like I'm the only one that's ever experienced this, you know? So I wanted to make this video both so that people who also have gone through this or are currently going through this don't feel so alone, and also as basically there are things that I wish that I had known prior to this being something that I went through, that I think would have definitely like changed my trajectory. And so I want to offer that up and my experience with that, so that hopefully if there's anyone else sort of about to go down this rabbit hole, that you will just have potentially more information to look at to make your own decisions with. And just general content warning here, I will be talking about obviously detransition and all of that. I will be talking about a lot of transphobia, both internalized and externalized. I will also be talking about substance use. That is a big part of the story for me personally. And in general, potentially like, like self-harm and suicidal ideation. Not sure how deep I'm going to get into that, but there's probably going to be a little bit of that mentioned. So yeah, just take care of yourself, watch or don't watch, whatever works for you. So I will start off with basically just a brief history of my coming out process and like what transition was like for me before my detransition. So I came out as trans to myself around age 13 or so, 13, 14. It was actually, I had I didn't know what being trans was until I saw there was this MCR fan account on Instagram where the person running it was a trans man. And I was like, oh my God, like you can do that? That is so, oh my God, I didn't know that was a thing. So I just thought that was really funny. But yeah, so I kind of I ended up coming out to my parents when I was maybe 14 or 15 or so. It was just kind of a thing I kept to myself for a little while. But my parents my parents are very my parents are very good people. They're very well meaning. They did not know what was going on when I came out to them. There was not as much public information about that kind of thing just available to the general public as there is now, for better or for worse in some cases. But yeah, just there was there were a few years there that were just difficult in terms of us not understanding each other, not understanding each other's perspectives, and I think that that was an area of difficulty for me at the time. And so I was not really, I basically wasn't able to do anything medical until I was 18, which is still earlier than a lot of people are able to, and I am very grateful for that. But yeah, so I had seen a therapist starting, I think, when I was 16, and I resented this whole process so much because I, my view of the situation at the time was basically that the people around me thought that there was something wrong with me, and that we were basically trying to fix that, right? That was the mindset that I as a teenager went into that with. And I also did not trust this therapist at all. And I think that was, I think that was not entirely unfounded. Small town, relatively conservative, and some of the things she said really just rubbed me the wrong way. I didn't feel like we were on the same page about things. But for better or for worse, I just was not open with her very much at all. I was very closed off during that process, and I did not feel comfortable bringing up a lot of the worries and concerns that I had about the transition process, or just in general, just basically just my feelings about things in general. I did not, it's your therapist. That's like the whole point of having a therapist. So, that process could have gone a lot better. And so during this period of time when I was a teenager, I was relatively confident within myself. I felt pretty certain of what I wanted in terms of transition and everything like that. But at the same time, I mean, I think this is natural and normal now. I did not at the time. At the time, I thought that I was not the only person experiencing this, but I didn't think this was a normal thing to experience. Um, was all of these, yeah, just a lot of fear around the process and how hormones were going to affect me, whether I was going to get as far as I wanted to, whether I was always going to be. I was very afraid of never feeling like enough, never feeling like I had made it far enough, and everything like that. Whether that was in terms of passing, or even if I did pass, just never feeling adequate, never feeling real. Basically, was a huge fear of mine, and I kind of shoved this down a lot. I guess one, because there were a lot of things related to it that I could sort of logically debunk. Like there were I had a lot of fears that I wasn't trans because of certain interests of mine, things that I like to wear, things that I like to do, media that I liked, that kind of thing. That it was easier for me to just say, all right, well, that's like obviously gender nonconformity exists. You don't have to be this like perfect like masculine man to transition, and that's very true. Like that's self evident to me, I guess. Um, but a lot of this stuff, a lot of it was stuff that I kind of in the back of my mind was worried that because I was having these thoughts, because these doubts existed in my mind, that meant that I was less likely to be trans. Like that a real trans person would not have these doubts in the first place. And again, for a long time it was easier for me as a teenager to basically just look at things in terms of like, I want this so badly. Obviously it's real to some degree, I guess. It was I had very brief periods of time where I would sort of try and go back or whatever, or just like see how comfortable I was with certain parts of being female, and it just never worked. Like I kept just debunking myself over and over again. Um, but it was the kind of thing where a lot of those fears, they just stayed in my mind. Even if I could think through them and think, oh, maybe this doesn't make sense entirely, I didn't talk to anyone about them. And I think that that was hugely detrimental to just my transition process ultimately, as I'm going to explain. Yeah, so as a teenager, relatively confident in my transness, relatively confident in my transition process. Definitely just had a lot of those background fears sort of growing that I did not feel like I could trust anyone with. So finally, the blessed day comes, my 18th birthday. I'm an adult now. And over the years, me and my parents had kind of come to understand each other better. They were a lot more chill about me being trans. And I think we're in a really good place about it now as well, which I really appreciate. Love you, mom and dad. But yeah, so I was then allowed to go on testosterone. I got it through Planned Parenthood. Shout out to Planned Parenthood. They need more funding. If you've been to Planned Parenthood recently, you know that. But yeah, so I get on testosterone. It's great. I'm chilling at this point, right? Um, I was having a little trouble with the shots, with just administering them, but for the first long while, this was like fine. And then I also went off to college, like probably 6 months later, right? My dream college, my first choice, was great. I loved it. Was very happy, and for the first semester or so, I was having a really good time. I felt really good about the changes that testosterone was bringing me. Mainly at that point, it was just my voice and like the tiniest little like fuzz of facial hair. But I was just really excited about the whole process. I felt really good about myself, relatively speaking, and college was really fun. I had made a lot of new friends. I was just enjoying myself a lot, and things were looking pretty good. The part when things kind of started to go in the other direction is when I introduced substances into my life. I had not drank, smoked weed, anything like that prior to going to college because I basically had this idea in my head that if I were to do anything like that, it would be really bad for me because I had a lot of issues with anxiety and depression. And if I had any kind of just like happy button, then that was I could see it going downhill very quickly. And I thought that by the time I was in college, I would be mature enough that that would not be an issue anymore. And I turned out to be very wrong about that. Damn, you gotta take the L sometimes. I don't know what to say. But yeah, so it took like one semester for basically things to get bad for me in that regard. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that, but basically I didn't know how to control myself around substances, and it showed. I had a falling out with a whole friend group because of that. I just it was clearly not good for me. It was clearly not good for me. And the majority of what seemed to not be good for me at the time was alcohol. So I basically cut alcohol out. I was like, all right, let's just not do that right now. And I'm very grateful that I was able to do that at the time because a lot of people aren't. But I was able to, which is fantastic because I don't think that would have gone very well otherwise. It's baby time. Baby time. Do you want to be in the video? Baby, you want to be in the video? My Stella. She hates being held. She doesn't like being held. She's so cute, though, my baby. Oh, maybe she's gonna sit down on me for moral support. Oh, she's laying down, you guys. This is so cute. Oh my god. But yeah, so I had removed alcohol from my life. I was sober for like that summer, and then when I came back to school in the fall semester, I after a few months, I had never had my own basically anything just in my apartment for myself before. And a friend left some weed in my apartment very graciously. Um, and I that was the first time that I had basically had that happiness button just to myself, like just purely. I didn't have to be at a party or anything like that. I didn't have to be around other people. I could just do whatever I wanted, and I started smoking weed every day almost immediately. And I want to be very, very clear as I'm saying this. Um, I guess a few things. One, I do not want to like demonize weed in this video or like any substance. It's so much less about the substance itself and just more about our relationship with it. And a lot of this stuff is really complicated, and people have just very different reactions to things. Very clearly, because I thought that weed was basically not going to do anything to me. I thought it was basically going to be harmless. And physically, it probably was, but it for me had a major mental impact on me. And if that is you, I totally get it. I don't see this taken seriously very often, but it is I have talked to a lot of other people at this point that have had similar experiences. I know it's real. You're not alone. Yeah, but basically, I fell into this pit where my anxiety and depression were getting a lot worse very quickly, and I was smoking weed basically all the time, every day. And I couldn't stop. I was unable to just stop myself the way that I had with alcohol, and it just took me into such a dark place. I ended up having to. I barely made it through my first semester of sophomore year, and I ended up actually having to drop out for a year or so. And during that year is when a lot of shit went down. So I took a medical withdrawal from all of my classes, and I basically for I think for around 6 months or so, and thank God I was able to do this because I did have savings from previous jobs and stuff like that that was supposed to go towards better things, but it should happen sometimes. Um, but yeah, I was just living off of savings. I did not have a job. I quit my former job. I couldn't. I felt like I couldn't basically be around anyone or do anything significant. And I was basically in my room smoking weed almost all the time. And I mean, I don't know. I'm sure that sounds whatever. I'm sure that sounds dramatic if you haven't experienced something like that in your life, but if you've been there, you know how it can be. And it was just I don't know, it was just this like pit of darkness that I was in that I couldn't crawl out of. So around this period of time, I had been on T for maybe probably total about a year and a half at that point. There was some inconsistency in my shots because I had started having more and more trouble actually doing them. I sort of developed a fear of needles over time, and there had been like an issue with my prescription where I hadn't been on it for a couple months. But yeah, overall, probably about a year and a half. And at that point, I was starting to realize that I did not look very different at all. Basically, I visually looked almost completely the same. And I'm not sure if that's real or not. I think sometimes with ourselves, it's difficult to see change happening slowly over time. And even in pictures, that can be difficult sometimes. But overall, to me, I basically still just looked like a girl with a slightly deeper voice. And this started to really weigh on me, and the fact that I was basically such a hermit at this point in my life, I had a lot of time to just think about that, to just catastrophize about what that the fact that this was going to last forever, it was always going to be this way, um, and that this was going to be a horrible thing for my life. I was basically never going to be able to feel comfortable out in public with other people, that I was going to be alone forever and that kind of thing. And it just it got to be really intense. And a lot of those fears that I had kind of pushed down when I was a teenager started coming back up really, really intensely. And yeah, it just got to be overwhelming. And again, I was not talking to anyone about this. I was completely alone with it. I was afraid of what people would say. I was afraid, the same as before, that if I talked about it, that basically like my testosterone would be taken away from me. I wouldn't be able to have top surgery and stuff like that. I was afraid that if I said anything about any of this, then I wouldn't be able to transition, which is really ironic considering what was about to happen, obviously. So during this period of time, I also got sucked into, I don't know, I guess just like new age spirituality YouTube. There's some weird shit on there, I will say that. I was not in as far as I could be, but I was definitely in there. And I got really just sucked into all of these videos about like the divine masculine and the divine feminine and stuff like that. And it ultimately led me to videos where people were sort of not talking directly about trans people necessarily, but sort of like implying that gender nonconformity in general, and like especially like being queer basically, was the result of some kind of like spiritual balance being off and stuff like that. There were a lot of different explanations for why that might be and stuff like that, like like trauma and all that, or something like that, or just like people not having like integrated their animus or anima or whatever in certain ways, just a lot of stuff. But it it was the kind of thing that initially when I watched these videos, they seemed silly to me, and over time I just felt I felt really drawn towards them, and I felt over time more and more afraid that they might be right. This was also coupled with the fact that I sort of never really had properly figured out how to basically I hadn't figured out so I grew up my mom is like a very much a feminist, right? And very I would say mostly like second wave style feminism. And that's what I grew up with, and it was basically a very like foundational part of my belief system, even like as a kid, right? And so I had kind of I had kind of made my gender nonconformity a part of my identity, in that I was like, I'm pushing against the patriarchy by like not being feminine as a girl, basically, which is child logic, but I was a child. So yeah. But yeah, I did. I mean, this sounds kind of silly, I guess, but I did also very much buy into a lot of the stuff about how basically like how much men suck. And I like, while it was something that I rationally understood was I guess just like I mean, one, obviously like not all men or whatever, but it was a product as well of people venting from their personal life experiences and all that. And also it was something that I felt personally, because growing up being perceived as female and believing that I like was a woman for a while was, I had a lot of fear of cis men, and I saw things very much from that perspective of these people are dangerous to me, and like it's sort of this like us versus them type of mentality about it, was what I grew up with. And I mean, I still have some stuff to like work through with that there's a lot that where I can say like, all right, this is rationally what I believe and stuff like that. But my feelings about it are still really tangled up. And that's a big thing that I've learned in this whole process, is that just because I have logically thought through what I want to believe about something doesn't mean that all of those feelings are no longer there. But yeah, so I basically had not figured out how to reconcile this with the fact that I very desperately wanted to be male, and that I was then actively transitioning and was going to be basically living as a man. Like I didn't know what to do with that, basically, and I felt shame about the fact that I had any conflict about that whatsoever in the first place. And so it just, again, it was another one of those things that just I did not talk to anyone about. I did not communicate about at all, and it was just me like having it locked in my own head, just bouncing around doing whatever it wanted. So essentially, there was a combination of one, all of these general fears that I had never addressed when I was a teenager, all of these like weird like spiritual videos that I had gotten sucked into, and just a lot of like internalized transphobia that I had gotten before that, but then was also engaging in at this point in time. And then a lot of fears about basically like betraying feminism by transitioning. Um, all three of these things together, and I'm sure like honestly there were a ton of factors coming together. It's hard to just neatly put things in boxes. But all of these things coming together, plus the fact that I was high as fuck all the time, I basically became extremely paranoid, extremely pessimistic about my future. I thought I would never get anywhere with transition. I thought that I was wasting my time. Basically, I thought I was already a failure. I thought things were already over, and I thought that I was delusional, and I thought that I was a bad person for being trans. And so yeah, naturally, I mean, I sort of stopped identifying as trans over time. I first sort of went back to identifying as non-binary, which had been I had initially identified as non-binary first before identifying as a trans man, and I just sort of stepped backwards into that, I guess, more so than like doing things all at once. But yeah, then ultimately, in January of 2020, the calm before the storm, right? I made a YouTube video that it was meant to be friends and family. It was meant to be, I didn't want to explain myself to everyone all at once, like just individually. So I figured just I'm going to make a video explaining all of this, and then it'll just be out there. It'll just be out there, whatever. And if somebody else can relate to it, then that's great. Um, and then it got 100,000 views, and a lot of people contacted me about it. And I mean, that was it. I had never experienced anything like that before, and that I think was where things started to get really a lot more intense for me. So obviously, lockdown happened pretty soon after that, and I had again a lot more time to think. At this point, I had been getting better about. I had actually started being able to go outside again. I had enrolled in school again, so so I was sort of like finishing off my sophomore year. But yeah, basically, I was sort of starting to engage more now with these external narratives of detransition. Before that point, I hadn't really watched. My memory of this is very fuzzy because I was high as shit all the time. I watched all of King of the Hill during this period of time, and I don't remember basically any of it. It's really tragic because I really like that show, but whatever. Um, but yeah, I hadn't really engaged with a lot of external narratives around detransition and a lot of like radical feminist gender critical content yet at this point. I think there was some stuff that I had looked at, but I was sort of still feeling very detached from it, I guess. And so now that I was public about it, basically, there were a lot of people contacting me and stuff like that. And I started, I was very determined at this point to basically to not be trans. I was like, maybe I can actually do this, because I believed at this point that my dysphoria and my just desire to transition was something that was not innate to me and was something that could be changed, basically could be healed was how I was thinking of it at the time. So I did start engaging with what I now ultimately retroactively understand to be like radical feminist content. At the time I did not. I guess it was less obvious to me certain things, like at least in the beginning, like that certain things were, I guess, tied to that sort of narrative as much as they were. A lot of, I feel like this has changed in the last few years, that there's a lot more talk about sort of the variety in turf rhetoric, and especially a lot of the stuff with J.K. Rowling and the way that they talk about trans men specifically, I feel like has become a lot more well known in public at this point. But honestly, when I was going through all of this stuff, I had not seen hardly anything talk about that side of things. My main red flags to look out for as far as turfs went was stuff going after trans women specifically. And a lot of them knew not to do this, not do this publicly, at least because that would immediately tip people off, right? And so I guess I was just hoping, I was hoping that if I could, like, detox my brain from the concept of gender, then I would be saved pretty much. I thought that I could. I thought that I could just remove it from myself, and here we are. Obviously, that was wrong. But yeah, I was engaging now openly with other people in these types of spaces, and a lot of it was very brief. I sort of had this, like, that video was posted. I had this like wave of confidence about it, and then that very quickly started to wane when basically I was, it's not like I was stupid. Like, I was aware that there was a lot of transphobia around me. And I thought, I mean, okay, two things. So one, I thought that I thought that a lot of the stuff that I was engaging with was separate from the people that like legitimately hated trans people. And to some extent, I think that's not necessarily entirely false. That I think that some of these people do genuinely believe what they are saying, and they are not at least overtly saying it out of a place of hatred. But I kept running into this issue where, especially on Twitter and stuff like that, anyone that I associated with that I felt more positively about, that I felt like maybe you like align with my beliefs better, maybe you're like a decent person and stuff like that, I was always like one or two steps removed from someone that I found to be absolutely horrifying. Um, Always. And that just started becoming more and more evident to me over time. Another thing was that and I'm still ashamed about this, but it is what it is. And I did have a lot of resentment towards the idea of gender as a whole, but especially towards other trans people, because I basically thought that trans people and people who supported trans people were basically making the existence of gender more concrete and hurting people in that process. And I viewed myself as a victim of that. And so I did have a lot of anger and resentment towards trans people as a group. And I think there's stuff that I engaged with during that period of time that, I mean, that one, I deeply regret, and that two, I mean, yeah, I mean, I definitely, while it could have been worse, it could have been a lot better. And there was a lot of stuff that was like openly transphobic that I did over time start to be okay with associating myself with. I was in general very angry at this period of time in my life. It sort of didn't, yeah, I had this like honeymoon period with it. And then by the second half of 2020, I just became very jaded and very angry. I started becoming frustrated with myself because what I had been doing before was no longer working. My dysphoria was getting worse again. My desire to transition in the back of my head was getting worse again. And I didn't want that. I didn't want to identify with that. I thought that it made me like a bad person. I thought that it made me weak. Um, I thought that it was morally bad. I thought that it was just delusional, all of that stuff. And so I got into a really bad place about that again. But at the same time, I was identifying the fact that a lot of the people that I was associating with were not associated with other people that I thought were very cool at all, and that a lot of these people, there were things they would say sometimes that would disturb me. That I just started pulling away basically after a few months. I think it was on maybe like 3 or 4 episodes of that podcast, and then it just ended because I left. Um, but yeah, I was just pulling away, and eventually, I mean, by the fall semester, it kind of became. I was still in that mindset myself personally, but I wasn't really being as public about it again. I just sort of drifted away from the public eye. I actually got sober briefly during this period of time as well in the fall semester. I had stopped smoking weed over the summer. I was just kind of finally able to do it randomly. I don't know. I'd been really struggling before, and it was just time, I guess. But then later on in that fall, I hadn't drank in a while at that point, since freshman year, basically. I think maybe on and off before then a couple times, but yeah, I was like, it's probably I'm older now. I'm more mature now. I can handle it more, you know. And so I started drinking at first casually, and it just by that winter, it it could have been worse. It was not good. It was not good for me. It was not good. Um, and so yeah, I just by that period of time I was miserable in the fact that I felt like a failure, and I felt like my dysphoria and like being trans was this like void closing in on me that I could never escape. And it was freaking me out so bad. I felt like a fraud also because I had been so confident previously that I had answers, and I realized that I didn't. and I was very confused at this point about what I believed and stuff like that. I think relatively, probably in like January or something like that, there was this Detrans Discord that I joined that turned out to have an entire channel dedicated to basically openly shitting on trans women. And that was pretty much my breaking point with that stuff that I was like, okay, um, something is severely wrong here. And I don't know what I believe about a lot of things right now. I don't know fully what's going on, but I know it's not that. So I, left that. I believe I deleted my Twitter around this period of time as well. I think around that time I also privated all my YouTube videos, and I became a hermit again basically for another 6 months. And I was drinking during this period of time. It sucked. It didn't last as long as it could have, and it was not as bad as it could have, but it still sucked. Um, and ultimately, I ended up trying to kill myself. And my therapist at the time sent me to rehab, which I resented her for at the time, but was obviously a good decision. So thanks to her for that. But yeah, I went to rehab. I got sober for a few months over the summer. And initially, I was still basically identifying as like a detrans woman. I it was basically at that point just because I had internalized a lot of these transphobic beliefs about. I thought like I literally would only ever be a woman no matter what I did. And so I basically had been framing it very much as like I'm accepting reality, right? I'm being strong and I'm being logical and all of that. And I just like broke during this period of time. Like once I got sober, it was something that I couldn't run away from anymore. I didn't have really anything to hide behind anymore at this point, and I started identifying as trans again. I remember when I told my parents about that, when I told my mom, I was really terrified that she was going to be disappointed in me about it, and she wasn't. I think she was fine with it. I'm not. I haven't talked to my parents a whole lot about what they thought during this period of time. But I was so afraid of what they would think, and they were just chill about it. So I really appreciate that. Um, but yeah, I started identifying as trans again. I was like, I was terrified because I still basically had those beliefs from before that like I I thought that I was stuck in my transition, that I would never get any further. I thought I would never be seen as a man. I thought I would never see myself as a man. That was a huge thing for me. That I would never feel just comfortable within myself, and I was terrified of that. But it basically felt at that point like I had no other choice. I felt like there was no way out, and also I was just sick of trying so hard to do something else and to be someone else. I couldn't do it anymore, and I didn't want to do it anymore. It stopped feeling like it was a worthwhile endeavor. But yeah, so I got sober for about 3 months over the summer. I had been at my parents' house during that period of time, and then when I came back to the city I live in for my senior year of college, I relapsed for about a month. It was worse than it had ever been before, and again, it only lasted for a month because I freaked the fuck out and called a helpline because I mean, I was ending up in dangerous situations basically, and I didn't want to be like that. Like I did want to get sober and recover, and so I went to detox, which I did not physically need, I don't think, but that was what the lady on the phone said was a good idea, and I couldn't stop on my own. I had been trying, and so it worked. Like if it works, it works fine. Um, and I started attending recovery meetings, which I had not been doing before. Been sober ever since. It's been about 2.5 years. Things looking good in that regard. But yeah, I started testosterone again in August, like right as my senior year started, and I was just sort of like, fuck it, let's see what happens. And then within about 6 months of starting testosterone again, full beard, full beard. I don't know what like funky timing or like weird genetics made that happen. But just I am so grateful for my beard. I'm so glad I started being read as male almost 100% of the time, like universally, like after just like a 6 months of starting testosterone again. And that, I don't want to get too into the subject of passing right now because I think there's a lot of nuance to that. And it's the kind of thing that like not everyone wants, not everyone thinks is important and stuff like that. It was very important to me, and I feel like I don't deserve what I got to some extent. There was all this. I don't know. Like I feel like I don't deserve it, but it is what it is now, and I am grateful for it regardless. So why taint a good thing? And yeah, I got a therapist around this time that was also a trans man. That shit was amazing. Oh my god. I don't see him anymore because of insurance reasons. My insurance changed. He didn't accept my new one. I'm genuinely upset about that. He was such a good therapist. But that was one of the first times I really felt understood by someone that I was talking to about all these topics. And I finally started to open up to him and just other people in general about all of this stuff. And that helped so much. So much. Yeah, wow. I also got top surgery about a year after I started testosterone again. Shout out to my top surgeon. It looks amazing. Thank you. Probably the best decision I've ever made. I was so scared when I had detransitioned that like if I ever got top surgery, I would like regret it so much, or it would feel so weird or something like that. Like it feels so good. It feels so good, and it's not just like it's less even that it feels good, and more so that just like on a day-to-day like moment by moment basis before I could feel the fact that they existed in the back of my mind. Like my clothes would brush them or something like that, or like my arm or something like, just I was aware of them as a part of my body. And it was always this like constant low level, like negative stimulus that I just don't have anymore. And it's so great. Yeah, I can't believe I thought that I would regret that. Shit fucking rules. Yeah, shout out to top surgery. And yeah, at this point, I can't complain. I have like a big community here that I love very much. There are a lot of other trans people in my life that are just really beautiful and inspiring people, and that without them I would not have had the courage to make this video. And in general, just the courage to be myself. I think that sometimes really just by being ourselves around other people, that can just be comforting and inspiring and all of that. And if you're one of my friends watching this video, or even if you just like if you are a trans person, or if you're just someone that, you are living your truth and stuff like that, I mean, that's a beautiful thing. And, I just, very much love to you for that. I think it's really important. And before I finish up, I wanted to just say that I spent so much time. I've wanted to make this video for about 2 years. And I kept thinking that I still have a lot of these doubts. I'm just going to be completely upfront. A lot of these fears, a lot of these doubts are still in my mind. I had for a while thought that I had some kind of like gender related OCD because of the degree and intensity of these thoughts and just the amount they were like affecting my life and functioning. It's gotten a lot better since I transitioned. It's a little bit harder to argue with the fact that I feel very much like obviously better now. It's a lot harder for my brain to talk me into transition being a bad thing. But they're still there. All of these feelings of inadequacy are still there. I still feel like a sore thumb among cis men. And I do feel, again, a lot of feelings of inadequacy. But it's easier for me to confront those things now and to not see them as, one, proof that I am being delusional and stuff like that. Like not seeing that as basically like proof. This just like circular reasoning that it's like proof that I'm not trans because I'm worried about not being trans. Um, and also just feeling less shame for having those feelings in the first place, because that's something that I've struggled with as well. Is any internalized transphobia that I have, I would tend to feel guilty about, and then that just basically made it worse. It made it harder to deal with, and it just added this additional layer of guilt and shame on top of everything, that it was just making everything all muddy and all tangled up. And just I have less of that now, especially again after talking to other trans people about similar thoughts and feelings that they've had, and like learning that they just basically, I'm not alone with things, and if you're going through this stuff, you are not alone with it either. Um, yeah, it's we're all human. We all have weird brains. Like it's okay. One of the biggest things ultimately that I have learned from this experience is that I do not have to have all the answers about things, and I do not have to be certain about everything all the time. I I don't know. There was so much stuff, both like before I transitioned, in terms of people saying, like you've got to be 100% certain about this, and I always had all of this fear around like, what if I do change my mind? Like, what if I'm certain now, but I'm not certain later, and stuff like that. And then also just all of this stuff that especially I picked up when I was in all of these like gender critical spaces of, like all this like what is a woman thing and stuff like that, and like needing to pin down these absolute definitions, and like what, like how one thing logically leads to another, um in terms of like how being trans works and stuff like that. And I just had to give all of that up, because I sort of realized that it wasn't, I mean, it sounds irrational, but like it was not compatible with reality. That there's, I don't know, like I had to look at what was actually real in front of me instead of what I theoretically thought should be the correct thing. Um, I I could no longer run away from the fact that transition was obviously something that I wanted, and something that obviously came to benefit me. And that maybe that's okay to just do. Like maybe it's, I don't know, like I no longer think that I'm like hurting anyone by being trans. And I don't know, just a lot of this stuff that I thought that I had to have 100% figured out in order to make this video, right? Because I kept wanting to figure out how to make myself like morally pure and like have all the answers and stuff like that, and be able to have the right explanations about things so that I could say any of this. I don't think I'm ever going to get to that point. And it just felt good to let go of that to some degree. But that is pretty much my story. I hope I didn't forget anything important. I'm sure afterwards I will realize like, oh, I didn't talk about blah 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 or whatever. But yeah, that's what I have. I hope that if you are having an experience like this, that again, you're not alone, and maybe this offered some sort of insight. I hope, maybe not. And if you haven't experienced anything like this, I guess I think that I don't know, there's not a lot of narratives like this that I see. So I'm hoping that if we are encountering more people having this type of experience over time, which I think may be the case, that we are able to, I guess, help these people. I guess what I have really benefited from is acceptance from the people around me, and the being given the space to continue to grow. And so I hope that I want to offer that to other people, and I hope that that's something we can do in general. Yeah. Yeah, and if you had any relevant experience or just general thoughts and comments, feel free to leave those down below. Like and subscribe, I guess. I don't know. I don't know whether I'll be posting more videos or not. Things are kind of up in the air at this point. I don't even know whether I'm going to read the comments, because I'm very sensitive. I get hurt by mean comments quite easily. But you know, say whatever you want. Maybe somebody, maybe it'll benefit someone else when they read it. Um, But yeah, that is all I have for today. Thank you very much for watching if you made it this far. And yeah, I hope you have a wonderful day.